Minister, the Workplace Health and Safety and Welfare Regulations 1992 state that changing rooms shall not be suitable unless they include separate facilities for or separate use of facilities by men and women where necessary for reasons of propriety. It is the Scottish Government's duty to ensure that all public bodies comply with such regulations. However, we have seen female nurses, female police officers being forced to share changing facilities with biologically male colleagues. So why are the NHS health boards and Police Scotland not complying with these regulations?
Well, I don't know for a fact that they're not. Right? I mean, I can't sit here and say that every single hospital or local board, I don't think that it would be reasonable to expect me to have that. Right here and now. What I would say to you is that I would refer back to my earlier comments, is that if we start with dignity and fairness, and if we make sure that we take the measures that are proportionate if we do that, we can accommodate. Nobody should be forced, and that includes anyone from any community at all, to be put in an undignified position. I'm very clear on that. I always have been, wherever that is on the public estate.
Okay. Minister, I did say earlier on, I spoke about the interpretation of the law with the EHRC. Again, I mean, you know out there, without naming any specific cases, there are issues going on that the interpretation of law and the interpretation of regulations, people are, I wouldn't use the word confused, but they're all interpreting it in their own way, every organisation is. And you're right, not every organisation is going out to basically not have those facilities or have those facilities. Again, it's out there, it's pretty muddy waters. People don't know what they're doing, and the fact is there's more and more, there are going to be more and more maybe legal cases coming forward so that clarity can be provided. Are you aware, Minister, and can you shed some light on this, that the interpretation isn't clear? I mean, I've talked about regulations there, I've talked about 2010 Equality Act earlier on as well. That are people complying with this, and do you see that the water is pretty muddy out there, that people are, how they're interpreting the law? Well, especially, organisations.
Yeah, so, I mean, I can't I can't comment on anything specific, as the member will be well aware. However, there is also the health and safety regulations in the workplace as well. So there are lots and lots of regulations there. And this is certainly a role for the EHRC because they are the enforcers, as it were. So they are the ones that have jurisdiction over this area. I think I have a meeting with them coming up very shortly, I think, possibly even next week. I'm about to meet with them. So we've always had a close working relationship, and I'm looking forward to meeting with them so that we can explore these issues of interpretation, reinforcement. I'm sure that those issues will come up.
No, thank you. Please do, because obviously right now it's not very fair out there for women and girls out there. They don't have their dignity, they don't have their respect, and they don't have fairness right now because they have to share single-sex spaces and services, in many places. So I'm hoping that there is some clarity provided from the government on this issue as well. Thank you.
I will have that conversation with the Equality and Human Rights Commission.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener. Minister, I've brought this up with many witnesses. There are 9 protected characteristics under the 2010 Equality Act, and characteristics such as religion and sex come in conflict with gender identity. For example, as I brought up in the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, many BAME and religious women do not feel comfortable having examinations such as smear tests, breast examinations being performed by biological males, including trans women. Similarly, Sandy Peggy was suspended for refusing to share a changing room with a biological male, who did not even have a gender recognition certificate. All too often, it looks as if women are thrown under the bus in favour of trans ideology. Minister, will this be the case for every woman of religion or colour if they come forward and say they cannot undress or be examined by a biological male? And do you think it's okay for women and girls including of BAME and religious backgrounds, to be undressing in front of biological males?
Thank you for that question. You are right. There are multiple questions. I will do my best to address them. If I don't, I am quite happy for you to write to me and I can give you further information, of course. My role as an Equalities Minister is to balance the rights of people. And quite rightly, you started off at the top by saying that there are 9 protected characteristics. Those characteristics were protected because over time, because it was recognised that each one of those characteristics were facing additional barriers, systemic discrimination and harms. And I suppose what we want to do is to make sure that each one of those categories has a better life and they have access to what everybody else has access to. So, as I was saying, my job is to make sure that we balance those rights in a compassionate and kindly way that is within the law. And it's not a competition. I do not see it as a competition. It is neither a hierarchy. And if we try to strip it back and look at what underpins this, and it's a human rights approach. So if we accept that we have human rights at the heart of everything that we are trying to do to advance equality, then we see the human that is in front of us and we make sure that they have dignity and they have respect and that they are not in difficult positions. Now, I understand that there is a bigger debate around this that has become very polarised and there are very strong feelings, and I understand that. And it is difficult, but as I said, my position is that it is not a competition, it is not a hierarchy. And if we start from that and dignity and fairness, then, of course, nobody should be getting undressed in a situation that they feel uncomfortable in. Nobody should.
Okay. No, thank you, Minister. I just want to probe on that. You talk about dignity and respect. Obviously, you said earlier on in one of your answers back that being of BAME background, just like myself as a woman, so you know when it comes down to certain religious aspects. So, I mentioned this last week. On one hand, governments, organisations are giving rights to prayer rooms, right? But on the other hand, they're taking a right away because you well know that as a woman of basically colour and religion, that when that person goes into that prayer room, they have to visit the bathroom before that. And if you're going to that single-sex space, that's fine. They've got their respect and dignity. But when that single-sex space is basically up for question and it becomes unisex space, then I want to ask, what people are obviously listening to this and they're very confused out there, that what happens then? Because they won't be needing that prayer room because they can't go in and do their vizu and basically do the steps before a prayer. So what's the use of providing something but then taking away a right somewhere else? And you're right, it's not a competition, but it's a fair balance and it is about dignity and respect. And right now, I don't think the women of colour and even women and girls in general out there are finding that balance because there's no respect and dignity there sharing a unisex toilet or a facility with a biological male.
I understand the nub of what you're trying to say, and if I can give you an example from my own experience, and the member will be aware that I don't often talk from my own experience because my job is to represent everybody and do the best that I can for everybody. However, it may be relevant here. It's for you to judge. There was a similar debate around this regarding women's refuges many years ago, and women's refuges regarding BAME women and Muslim women as well. And so BAME Muslim women that were fleeing domestic violence were getting accommodation in women's refuges. But within that space, they were having their harms compounded because they did not have access to culturally sensitive food. They did not have access to, other women as well that were like them. People take comfort in having that service. They were also victims of additional racism within that space as well. And when those issues were talked about, and it was discovered that actually, yes, that there is a practical way forward of looking for solutions where everybody, their needs, and our needs are complex, they're very nuanced as well. How can we accommodate for those? And I know that after that, there were women's refuges that were set up that was specifically for women from ethnic minorities, where they didn't then have to suffer the additional harm that was caused by racism within that space. So I hope that that gives the member some kind of comfort, is that I do take seriously and I understand the complexities. But my job as a minister is to balance that, and to balance it with as much fact as I can, and to reassure people, and to make sure that the letter of the law is also being followed as well.
Thank you, Minister. I've got a few other questions. You did touch on domestic abuse. Minister, I've spoken to countless survivors of sexual assault and domestic abuse. Many of these women do not feel comfortable when surrounded by men and have stressed the importance of single-sex spaces. So do you believe that a woman who does not want to share a space with a trans-identified male should have to explain why? For example, by disclosing a history of sexual assault or domestic abuse?
I think, Ms Gosal, that any woman who has suffered from domestic violence, and I have met many, I have been able to visit many Rape Crisis Scotland, for instance. Sorry, forgive my hesitation. I was trying to think of what the different organisations that I've met. And I've spoken directly to those women. And I think that absolutely it should be based around the survivor and their needs, because that is the most important thing. And the law is quite clear on that, that any reasonable, it has to be proportionate, it has to be all this. I've answered questions on this, I'm on record as, saying the statement. But here I can flesh it out a little bit in that sense, is to say, of course, it should be person-centred. I'll take you back to my original bit about if we take a human rights approach and look at the human that's in front of us, we can find ways around that, if that's the starting point.
Okay. No, thank you. You'll be glad to know there's only 2 more questions left. Minister, the Scottish Prison Service policy for the management of transgender people in custody allows for some men and trans identities to be housed in the women's estate. This includes violent men, providing they do not have a known record of violence against women. But in their Equality and Human Rights Impact Assessment, SPS say they are public sector equality duty compliant. Can I ask, is the Scottish Government confident that the SPS are PSZ compliant?
Can I bring in Kat McKeegan on this, because you've touched on the prison service? Yeah, so it's not directly. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for the question. It is for this. This is the Scottish Prison Services policy. Obviously, that is for them to work out if they are compliant with the equality legislation, and it is for the EHRC as the regulator as well in that place. They play a role. Scottish Government has always been clear that it is a role of the employer to ensure that they are compliant with the appropriate legislation, all of it, including the workplace regulations and the Equality Act.
Okay, so you couldn't comment if they were compliant or not?
No, it would not be appropriate for a Scottish Government to do so.
Okay, thanks.